Are you out of your mind? That thing is a monster. It's a liability, and it is in direct violation of the community standards." The voice belonged to Brenda, and it was currently shattering the peaceful 105-degree afternoon silence of my own backyard. I blinked, lowering my sunglasses. I was sitting in a faded lawn chair, holding an iced coffee that was rapidly losing its structural integrity in the brutal Gilbert, Arizona sun. I looked up. Brenda, my newly acquired neighbor, and the undisputed dictator of the Desert Blossom Homeowners Association, was presently hanging halfway over the 6-foot cinder block wall that separated our properties. Her knuckles were white where they gripped the hot stone. Her face was the color of a freshly boiled lobster, though whether that was from the desert heat or pure, unfiltered suburban rage was up for debate. In her right hand, she was clutching a bright pink retractable measuring tape. She was pointing it at my dog like it was a loaded weapon. I looked from Brenda to the monster in question. Meatball is a 150-pound English Mastiff. He possesses a head the size of a microwave and a body composed entirely of loose skin, drool, and a deep, profound desire to nap. At this exact moment, the beast was flat on his back in the middle of my patchy Bermuda grass, all 4 paws completely limp in the air, snoring so loudly it sounded like a flooded dirt bike engine trying to turn over. A single cabbage-white butterfly was fluttering about 3 inches from his nose. Meatball didn't even twitch. He was functionally afraid of his own flatulence, much less a human being. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice entirely too calm just to watch a vein throb in her forehead. "You are screaming over a cinderblock wall at a dog who is currently in a stage 4 REM sleep coma. What exactly is the emergency here?" "The emergency is that you moved in 3 weeks ago and you are already flouting the rules," she snapped, waving the pink measuring tape wildly. "I measured the clearance when he stood up this morning. I know for a fact he exceeds the height and weight restrictions. Section 4, paragraph B of the Desert Blossom bylaws. No dogs over 75 pounds and absolutely no dogs of an intimidating stature allowed on the premises." "Intimidating stature?" I repeated, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The ice rattled loudly. "Brenda, he tripped over the garden hose yesterday and cried for 10 minutes. The only thing he intimidates is his food bowl." "Don't you get smart with me," she barked, leaning further over the wall. I legitimately thought she was going to tip over and land in my petunias. "I am the HOA president. I enforce the standards of this community. This is a family neighborhood, not a junkyard for oversized, aggressive murder hounds. You need to get rid of it." My demeanor shifted. The casual, sunny afternoon vibe evaporated instantly. I stood up, setting my iced coffee down on the patio table with a sharp clack. Meatball, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure, let out a massive, vibrating snort and rolled over onto his stomach, blinking blearily at the wall. "I'm not getting rid of my dog, Brenda," I said, walking slowly toward the fence line. "I own this house. He's my dog. He stays inside my fenced yard. He doesn't bark, he doesn't bite, and quite frankly, he barely moves. You need to get off my wall and find a hobby that doesn't involve spying on my property with a tape measure." "You have 24 hours!" she shrieked, finally dropping back down on her side of the wall. Her muffled voice carried right through the masonry. 24 hours, or I am bringing the full weight of the board down on you." I just laughed, shook my head, and went back to my chair. I figured she was just blowing off steam. I figured it was empty threats from a woman who had zero control in her actual life and used a neighborhood committee to feel powerful. I was wrong. The very next afternoon, I pulled into my driveway after a long day at the office. The Arizona heat was radiating off the asphalt in shimmering waves. As I walked up to my front door, I saw it. Taped directly to the wood, right at eye level, was a neon yellow envelope. I ripped it off, unlocked the door, and stepped into the air-conditioned sanctuary of my entryway. Meatball ambled over, his massive tail lazily thumping against the drywall, leaving a smear of drool on my knee as he leaned his entire body weight against my leg in greeting. I scratched behind his ears with one hand and tore open the envelope with the other. It was a formal citation from the Desert Blossom HOA. It was printed on heavy cardstock, just to make sure I knew they meant business. Official notice of violation. Property owner. Lot 42. Violation of Section 4(b). Harboring of a prohibited animal. Subject animal exceeds 75 louses and meets the criteria for intimidating stature. I skipped down past the legal preamble to the bottom line. Fines will be assessed at $100 per calendar day until the offending animal is permanently removed from the premises. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in a lien being placed upon the property. I stared at the paper. $100 a day. $3,000 a month. Just for having a lazy dog in my own fenced-in backyard. Brenda wasn't just trying to bully me. She was trying to financially bleed me out. I looked down at Meatball. He was sitting on my foot, staring up at me with big, droopy, amber eyes. A long string of saliva detached from his jowl and landed squarely on my shoe. "Well, buddy," I muttered, tossing the yellow paper onto the kitchen island. "Looks like you're a wanted fugitive." I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a cold water, and sat down at my laptop. If there is one thing you need to know about me, it's that I don't do well with petty authority. I don't roll over. If you push me, I don't just push back. I find the exact rule book you're hitting me with. I memorize it, I find the loophole, and I use it to dismantle your entire existence. I opened a new tab. I didn't search for the HOA bylaws. I already knew what they said. And honestly, HOAs have an absurd amount of contractual power when it comes to standard residential rules. Fighting them directly on their own turf is a losing game. They have money, they have lawyers, and they have nothing but time. No. To beat an HOA, you have to go above them. You have to find a bigger fish. You have to find a state law that supersedes municipal and neighborhood covenants. I started digging into Arizona state statutes, specifically property rights and zoning laws. Gilbert, Arizona, for all its current suburban sprawl and strip malls, has a deeply ingrained agricultural history. Before the concrete and the HOAs took over, this whole area was farmland. And because farmers have massive lobbying power, states with agricultural histories tend to have very robust laws protecting farming activities from being shut down by angry city people moving into the country. I spent 4 hours clicking through dense legal jargon. I drank 3 more cups of coffee. Meatball fell asleep under my desk, his snoring vibrating up through the floorboards. Around midnight, my eyes burning from the blue light of the screen, I found it. The Arizona Right to Farm Act. Specifically, the Maricopa County Agricultural Zoning Codes regarding urban farming and residential property rights. I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the text with my finger. Any property zoned for single-family residential, possessing a lot size of at least 8,000 square feet, may legally harbor up to 5 fowl, including but not limited to chickens, ducks, or quail, for non-commercial agricultural use. Okay, that was interesting. My lot was just over 9,000 square feet. I could legally own ducks, but that didn't help Meatball. I kept reading, scrolling down into the sub-clauses regarding the protection of said urban farming assets. And there, buried in Section 12, Paragraph C of the State Agricultural Guidelines, was the golden ticket. The absolute, glowing, radioactive loophole that was going to ruin Brenda's life. Under state agricultural preemption guidelines, animals specifically acquired, designated, and utilized to protect livestock or fowl from predators are exempt from local municipal and neighborhood size, breed, and weight restrictions. These animals are legally classified as working agricultural assets, not household pets. I stopped breathing for a second. I read it again, and then I read it a third time, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from the caffeine. If you have a pet dog, the HOA can regulate its size. But if you have a farm, and you have a dog protecting that farm from predators, like the coyotes that absolutely infested the outskirts of Gilbert, that dog is no longer a pet. It is a piece of farm equipment. It is a legally protected agricultural safety asset, and state law dictates that no local municipality or HOA can restrict or penalize a registered agricultural operation. State law preempts HOA bylaws every single time. I looked under my desk. Meatball was currently twitching in his sleep, dreaming about chasing something he would never actually have the energy to catch. Meatball, I whispered into the quiet kitchen. He didn't wake up. Meatball, I said, a little louder. He cracked one droopy eye open. Congratulations, pal, I grinned, a massive malicious smile spreading across my face. You just got a job. The next morning, I woke up feeling, honestly, completely revitalized. It's amazing what a little bit of legally sanctioned spite can do for your energy levels. I didn't even need my usual 3 shots of espresso. I was running entirely on the pure, unadulterated thrill of malicious compliance. Meatball, on the other hand, was still asleep at the foot of my bed, snoring with the rhythmic intensity of a commercial chainsaw. I nudged his massive, wrinkled shoulder with my foot. "Wake up, employee. We have administrative work to do." He let out a low groan, stretched his front legs out until his joints popped, and immediately went back to sleep. I guess I couldn't blame him. Farm work is tough, especially when you haven't actually started yet. I spent the next 3 hours navigating the absolute labyrinth that is the Arizona Department of Agriculture's online portal. I mean, literally, whoever designed this website must have been actively trying to prevent people from using it. It was all drop-down menus from 2004 and PDFs that took 10 minutes to load. But I didn't care. I was a man on a mission. I printed out Form 7A, Declaration of Urban Agricultural Activity, and Form 112C, Registration of Non-Lethal Predator Deterrent Assets. Filling these out was one of the greatest joys of my adult life. Under Property Zoning Type, I proudly checked the box for Residential Urban Agriculture Exempt. Under Primary Livestock to be Protected, I wrote in Poultry, Fowl, and then came the masterpiece. Form 112C required the name, breed, and identification markers of the animal being registered as a working asset. I looked over at Meatball, who had finally migrated from the bedroom to the kitchen and was currently resting his enormous chin on the tile floor, watching a dust bunny drift past. I took my black pen and, in my neatest block lettering, filled out the form. Name of asset. Asset number 001. Formerly Meatball. Breed, English Mastiff. Weight, 150 kilograms. Primary duty, livestock. Guardian dog, LGD. Predator deterrence. I mean, the only thing Meatball deterred was me having personal space on the couch, but the state didn't need to know that. According to the paperwork, he was a highly trained elite defender of the flock. He was the thin, furry line between my future livestock and the coyotes that roamed the Gilbert suburbs at night. But forms alone aren't enough to scare an HOA. HOAs deal with angry letters and printed emails all day long. If you want to put the fear of God, or at least the fear of litigation, into a neighborhood committee, you need a notary stamp. You need embossed seals. You need it to look like it came from the desk of someone who charges $600 an hour. I shoved the paperwork into a manila folder, leashed up asset number 001, and loaded him into the back of my SUV. We drove down to the local strip mall, where there was a shipping and printing store that advertised notary services. The bell chimed as I walked in, Meatball lumbering behind me like a depressed bear on a string. The kid behind the counter couldn't have been older than 19. He was wearing a polo shirt that was 2 sizes too big and had the exhausted, dead-eyed stare of someone who had spent his entire morning dealing with people who didn't know how to tape a box shut. "Hey," I said, sliding the manila folder onto the counter. "I need these 2 forms notarized, please." The kid pulled the papers toward him and glanced over them to find the signature lines. He paused. He looked at the paper, then looked over the counter at Meatball, who was currently sitting on the industrial carpet, staring blankly at a cardboard cutout of a smiling delivery driver. "You're registering this dog as farm equipment?" the kid asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Technically," I corrected, leaning against the counter. "I am registering him as a working livestock guardian dog. It's an agricultural asset. It's a whole legal distinction." The kid looked at Meatball again. A long, thick string of drool hung from Meatball's left jowl, stretching down until it pooled on the carpet. "Does he guard things?" "Fiercely," I lied, without breaking eye contact. "He is a predator's worst nightmare. Now, do you need my driver's license or what?" The kid just shook his head, grabbed his notary stamp, and hit both forms with a satisfying, heavy thunk. "Whatever, man. That'll be $10. I paid the kid, took my freshly certified state agricultural documents, and marched out to the car. Step 1 was complete. I had the legal framework. Now I needed the actual, physical excuse for the legal framework to exist. I needed livestock. And I didn't just want any livestock. I wanted the most obnoxious, loud, visually confusing livestock the law would allow. I pulled out my phone and searched for feed stores and hatcheries on the outskirts of Maricopa County. Chickens were the obvious choice, but chickens, honestly, are too mainstream. Plus, hens cluck, but they aren't inherently chaotic. Roosters are loud, but they are illegal in almost every residential zone, agricultural loophole or not. No, I needed something that fell under the legal definition of foul, but brought a unique, terrible energy to the neighborhood. I found a place out in Queen Creek called Miller's Hatchery and Supply. I called the number. A guy with a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Miller's," he grunted. "Yeah, hi," I said, putting the car in gear. "Quick question, do you sell ducks? And if so, do you have adult ones? I don't really have the time to raise ducklings. I need immediate, fully operational ducks." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mister, I got ducks. What exactly are you looking for?" "I'm looking for volume," I said. "Not physical size. I mean acoustic volume. I need the loudest, most dramatic ducks you legally sell." The guy chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "You want Indian runners? They don't fly. They run around like bowling pins with legs, and they never shut up. I got 3 hens I was going to use for breeding, but I can part with them for $40 a pop." "Sold," I said. "I'll be there in 30 minutes." The drive out to Queen Creek took me past the endless stucco subdivisions and out into the actual desert, where the properties got larger and the fences got rustier. Miller's Hatchery was a sprawling compound of chain-link enclosures, metal barns, and the overwhelming smell of wet straw and alfalfa. Mr. Miller was a tall, incredibly weathered guy in a faded denim shirt. He took one look at my clean sneakers and my SUV and smirked. "You don't look like much of a poultry farmer, son." "It's a recent passion," I told him, handing over 6 $20 bills. "Where are my bowling pins?" He led me around to the back of a large barn. Inside a wire pen were 3 of the strangest creatures I had ever seen. They didn't look like normal ducks. They stood perfectly upright like penguins, with long necks and sleek, nervous bodies. One was entirely white, one was a mottled brown, and the third was black with a green sheen on its head. And Miller wasn't kidding about the noise. The moment we approached the pen, all 3 of them began quacking at an unbelievable, aggressive volume, running back and forth in perfect synchronization. "Loudest birds on the property," Miller said proudly. "You want 'em in a box?" "Please," I said. We managed to wrangle the 3 terrified, screaming birds into a large cardboard appliance box with some air holes punched in the top. I loaded the box into the back of the SUV, right next to Meatball. The ride home was an experience I will never, ever forget. It was 35 minutes of pure, unadulterated auditory hell. The ducks did not stop quacking for a single second. It wasn't a gentle quack, quack. It was a panicked, rapid-fire quack, 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 quack that echoed off the interior of the car. Meatball, for his part, was having a complete mental breakdown. My fearless elite predator deterrent asset had squeezed himself as far forward into the front passenger seat as his 150-pound frame would allow, his massive head wedged under my armpit while he trembled violently. "Relax, Asset 001, I yelled over the deafening sounds of poultry panic. "Those are your co-workers!" We finally pulled into my driveway. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and prepared for the integration phase. I went into the backyard first and dragged a hard plastic kiddie pool out of the garage. I set it up in the center of the lawn, right in plain view of Brenda's cinder block wall, and filled it with the garden hose. Then, I went back to the car, grabbed the heavy cardboard box, and carried it to the yard. Meatball trailed 10 feet behind me, walking with his belly practically scraping the grass, eyeing the box like it contained a bomb. I set the box down next to the pool, grabbed a pair of scissors, and sliced the packing tape. I stepped back. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. And then, like a clown car exploding, all 3 Indian runner ducks scrambled over the cardboard flaps simultaneously. They hit the grass running, standing completely upright, their little webbed feet slapping the ground as they sprinted in a chaotic circle around the yard, screaming at the top of their lungs. The white one bolted toward the patio furniture. The brown one sprinted headfirst into the fence. The black one saw the kiddie pool, launched itself into the air, and belly flopped into the water, immediately splashing half of it out onto the grass. Meatball let out a high-pitched yelp, a sound I had never heard him make before, and scrambled backward so fast he lost traction on the wet grass, sliding sideways into my leg before bolting behind my barbecue grill, where he sat shivering, refusing to look at the birds. I stood in the center of my yard, watching the chaos unfold. The ducks were splashing, quacking, and tearing up the lawn. My giant dog was hiding behind a Weber grill. The noise level was phenomenal. It was perfect. "All right," I announced to the yard. "The white one is breakfast. The brown one is lunch. The black one is dinner. Welcome to the farm." Now that the agricultural operation was officially running, it was time to drop the hammer on the Desert Blossom Homeowners Association. I went inside, washed my hands, and sat down at my laptop. It was time to draft the letter. I didn't want to just send an email. Emails get ignored. Emails get forwarded and lost in spam folders. I needed this to be a physical, tangible threat. I opened a blank document and started typing. I wanted the tone to be polite, utterly professional, and absolutely dripping with legal venom. To the Desert Blossom Homeowners Association Board of Directors, attention. Brenda, last name withheld because I didn't actually know it, so I just wrote HOA President. This letter serves as formal, certified notice regarding the citation issued to my property on date. referencing Section 4. Of the Desert Blossom Community Guidelines. Please be advised that the animal in question, formerly functioning as a household pet, has been officially reclassified and registered with the State of Arizona Department of Agriculture as a working livestock guardian dog, LGD. Designation Asset, number 001. This asset is currently active and deployed on my property for the sole purpose of predator deterrence and the protection of legally sanctioned agricultural livestock. I paused, took a sip of my coffee, and smiled at the screen. This was the best part. I mean, like throwing their own lack of authority in their faces is the peak sovereign ruling experience. I kept typing. As per the Maricopa County Agricultural Zoning Codes and the Arizona Right to Farm Act, ARS Stories 3-112, properties zoned for single-family residential use exceeding 8,000 square feet are permitted the harboring of up to 5 fowl for non-commercial agricultural purposes. I am currently housing 3 fowl on the premises. Furthermore, state agricultural preemption statutes dictate that working agricultural assets, including LGDs, utilized for the protection of said livestock, are strictly exempt from all local, municipal, and neighborhood-specific restrictions regarding weight, breed, size, or stature. State law supersedes community covenants in all matters regarding agricultural operations. Therefore, your citation is invalid, legally unenforceable, and null. Any further attempts by the Desert Blossom HOA to levy fines, place liens, or otherwise restrict my registered agricultural operation will be considered a direct violation of state statutes protecting urban farming initiatives. Harassment of an agricultural asset carries severe state-level penalties. I have attached notarized copies of my state registration for your records. I consider this matter closed. Please govern yourselves accordingly. I hit print. I listened to the printer whir and spit out the pages. I took the letter, along with the copies of the notarized forms, folded them neatly, and slid them into a crisp white envelope. I didn't just put a stamp on it. I drove to the post office and sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. That means the mail carrier physically could not leave the envelope in the HOA's central mailbox. They had to take it directly to Brenda's front door and make her sign a green card proving she received it, and that green card would be mailed back to me as concrete evidence. I walked out of the post office holding the certified mail receipt like it was a championship trophy. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. All I had to do now was wait for the explosion. I drove back home, the Arizona sun beating down on the roof of my car. When I pulled into the driveway, I could already hear the ducks. They were having some kind of loud, frantic meeting in the backyard. I walked through the side gate to check on my farm. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were currently marching in a tight, single-file line across the patio, aggressively quacking at a terracotta pot. Meatball, my fearless, state-certified predator deterrent, had abandoned his spot behind the barbecue. He was now sitting on top of one of my padded lounge chairs, all 4 paws tucked under his massive body to ensure he wasn't touching the ground, watching the ducks with wide, terrified eyes. "Good work, Asset 001, I told him, tossing him a milk bone. It hit him in the nose and bounced off, landing on the patio. He refused to get off the chair to retrieve it. One of the ducks sprinted over, snatched the dog biscuit in its bill, and ran into the kiddie pool with it. Meatball let out a soft, defeated whine. The next 48 hours were agonizingly quiet. I knew Brenda had received the letter. The tracking number confirmed it had been signed for at 10:14 a.m. on Tuesday. I spent Tuesday evening and all of Wednesday sitting on my patio, waiting for the inevitable volcanic eruption over the cinderblock wall. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the ducks destroying my lawn, and Meatball occasionally sighing heavily from his safe space on the lounge chair. I guess I should have known Brenda wouldn't just yell over the wall this time. When a neighborhood dictator gets hit with a certified legal threat, they don't engage in petty bickering. They escalate. They go looking for reinforcements. She was probably scanning the letter with a magnifying glass, trying to find a typo she could use against me. She was probably calling the property management company, only to be told by their lawyers that state law is, in fact, state law. And they couldn't touch me. But I knew she wouldn't give up. People like Brenda don't know how to take an L. If they lose on the rule book, they try to change the game. Thursday morning, I got my answer. I was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking my coffee, and answering some emails for work, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine pulling into the cul-de-sac. It wasn't the garbage truck. It was too early for the mail. I stood up, walked to the front window, and pulled back the blinds. A massive, beat-up white Ford F-250 was parked against the curb. The bed was loaded down with lumber, PVC pipes, and bags of concrete. The side of the truck had a faded decal that read, "Sal's Custom Contracting. If you can dream it, I can build it." A man stepped out of the truck. He was built like a fire hydrant, wearing a worn-out tool belt, a faded Diamondbacks baseball cap, and a look of permanent annoyance. He walked up my driveway, holding a clipboard. I smiled, grabbed my keys, and opened the front door before he could knock. Because if Brenda thought I was just going to stop at exploiting a legal loophole on paper, she was out of her mind. If I was going to have a federally protected urban farm in the middle of a heavily restricted suburban hellscape, I was going to do it right. The law stated that the ducks needed a safe, enclosed habitat, and I fully intended to build them a fortress. "You the guy who called about the poultry enclosure?" the contractor asked, his voice like gravel grinding in a blender. "That's me," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "You must be Sal." "Yeah," he grunted, looking past me into the house. Meatball was standing in the hallway, peering around the corner, refusing to come near the door. "That the dog you mentioned on the phone? The one that needs the reinforced perimeter?" "No," I said, pulling the door shut behind me. "The dog doesn't need the perimeter. The dog is the security guard. The perimeter is for the birds." Sal frowned, scratching his thick, graying beard. "Right. The birds. You said over the phone you needed a predator-proof agricultural bunker poured on a concrete foundation." "Exactly." "Buddy, I gotta be honest," Sal said, pulling a tape measure off his belt. "I build patios. I build pergolas. I pour driveways. I don't usually build military-grade fortifications for chickens in the middle of Gilbert." "They aren't chickens, Sal. They are ducks," I corrected him, leading him around to the side gate. "And they are highly valuable agricultural assets. We need to do this entirely by the book. It needs a concrete slab to prevent coyotes from digging under. It needs framed walls, a reinforced steel mesh roof, and it needs to be exactly, down to the millimeter, 1 inch below the maximum height restriction for outbuildings outlined in the HOA bylaws, so they can't force me to tear it down for a height violation." Sal stopped walking. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap. He looked at my perfectly manicured house, then looked at my neighbor's pristine 2-story stucco mansion looming over the cinder block wall. He was putting the pieces together. "Let me get this straight," Sal said slowly. "You want me to bring a cement mixer into a residential cul-de-sac, pour a permanent slab, and build an industrial wire mesh cage in your backyard, specifically designed to bypass the neighborhood rules, just to house some ducks?" I nodded, entirely serious. "Yes. I also need it to be as loud and aesthetically displeasing as legally possible, while still maintaining structural integrity." Sal stared at me for a long, quiet moment. The desert wind blew a stray piece of tumbleweed across the driveway. From the backyard, the frantic, muffled screaming of 3 Indian runner ducks echoed through the neighborhood. Slowly, a wide, deeply concerning grin spread across Sal's face. "I charge double for spite work," he said. "I'll pay you triple if you can start the concrete mixer before 8 a.m., I replied, without missing a beat. Sal chuckled, flipped his clipboard open, and clicked his pen. "Show me where you want the bunker, kid. Let's make some noise." The next morning, the sun barely broke over the superstition-tinged horizon of Gilbert when the heavy machinery rolled in. It was 7:02 a.m. Technically, under the Desert Blossom HOA rules, general construction and contractor noise was permitted starting at 7 a.m. on weekdays. I had checked. I had verified it twice. Sal, true to his word, had backed his F-250 right onto my gravel driveway, towing a commercial-grade, tow-behind diesel concrete mixer that looked like it had survived 3 separate military deployments. The hydraulic engine roared to life with a deafening metallic shudder that rattled the double-pane glass of my front windows. I was sitting on my back patio, wearing my sunglasses, slowly stirring a glass of cold brew. Meatball was laying right next to my feet. Every time the diesel engine backfired, Meatball's massive ears would twitch, but he was far too lazy to actually stand up. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, however, were absolutely in their element. The roaring engine seemed to energize them. They were sprinting back and forth along the lawn in their signature, perfectly vertical stance, quacking like manic air horns. Within 4 minutes, literally, I timed it, I heard the frantic scraping of lawn furniture on the other side of the 6-foot cinder block wall. Hey, what in the hell is going on over there?" Brenda's head popped up over the wall. She was wearing a satin nightgown, a pair of oversized black visor sunglasses, and a facial mask that made her look like a deeply offended lizard. Her hands were gripping the stone top so hard I thought she was going to chip the mortar. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, looked up, and waved politely. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful Arizona sunrise, isn't it?" "Are you completely out of your mind?" she shrieked, having to yell at the top of her lungs to compete with Sal's concrete mixer, which had just begun churning a heavy mix of gravel, sand, and water. "It is 7 in the morning. You are running industrial equipment in a residential cul-de-sac. I am calling the board. I am calling the city." Sal walked out from the side yard carrying a heavy steel wheelbarrow, wearing his high-visibility orange vest and a yellow hard hat. He stopped, looked up at Brenda hanging over the wall, took off his work gloves, and spit onto the dirt. "Lady," Sal yelled up at her, pointing a thick, calloused finger. "You're leaning over an active construction zone without head protection. That's an OSHA violation on your part if you fall into my wet cement, so back up before I take a picture." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish washed up on a dock. "OSHA? This is a private residence. What are you even building?" I stood up, walked toward the wall, and pulled the laminated architectural sketch Sal and I had finalized the night before out of my back pocket. "We are constructing a permanent predator-proof agricultural housing unit, Brenda," I shouted over the noise. "As per Maricopa County Livestock Maintenance Guidelines, urban poultry requires a secured perimeter to prevent burrowing by regional predators, specifically Canis latrans, the native coyote. It features a 5-inch poured concrete foundation, galvanized steel mesh framing, and an insulated timber roof." "You can't build that!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Architectural review. You need prior approval from the HOA Architectural Committee." Section 8A. Any permanent structure requires a 30-day review period. Section 8. Applies to non-exempt residential improvements, Brenda, I replied smoothly, channeling the absolute spirit of sovereign ruling. Under Arizona Revised Statutes Title III, Section 112, the State Right to Farm Act, and county zoning preemption laws, local architectural review boards cannot delay, restrict, or prohibit the construction of essential safety housing for registered agricultural assets. If you delay my construction and a coyote eats asset number 1's protected flock, the HOA is legally liable for agricultural destruction of property under state law." Sal let out a loud, sudden bark of laughter, grabbed the handles of his wheelbarrow, and headed back toward the pit he had dug. "God, I love suburban politics," he muttered as he walked away. Brenda looked like she was about to have a stroke. Her face turned a violent shade of magenta behind her face mask. "This isn't over," she choked out. "I'm calling code enforcement. I'm calling animal control. I am having that fake farm shut down by the county before lunch." She dropped back down behind the wall with a loud, heavy thud. "Have a great day, Brenda," I called out. "Watch out for the wet concrete." For the next 4 hours, my backyard was a whirlwind of glorious, loud, aggressive productivity. Sal and his 2 crew members poured the concrete slab, set the heavy steel posts directly into the wet cement, and began framing out the enclosure. By noon, it was fully taking shape. It was 6 feet high, exactly 1 inch below the maximum allowed structure height without a municipal building permit, and featured heavy-duty, galvanized 1/4-inch hardware cloth stretched across the entire frame. It looked less like a duck coop and more like a high-security detention facility for aggressive waterfowl. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner loved it. The second Sal finished setting up the temporary ramp, the 3 ducks marched inside, took 1 look at the dedicated water trough, and immediately began splashing frantically, shooting dirty water out through the wire mesh onto the freshly cleared dirt perimeter. Meatball had finally mustered the courage to investigate. He walked over to the wire mesh, lowered his massive wrinkled snout, and sniffed the bottom wire. Breakfast turned around, looked Meatball dead in the eye, and let out a deafening quack, about 2 inches from his nose. Meatball jumped backward, all 4 feet leaving the ground simultaneously, and scrambled back to the patio table, knocking over my plastic lawn chair in his haste to escape the violent birds. "Great job guarding the flock, buddy," I told him, patting his ribs. "You're worth every penny of state asset protection." Around 1:30 p.m., the noise of Sal's crew wrapping up was replaced by a new sound. The low, distinct rumble of 2 separate government vehicles pulling up to the front of my house. I walked around the side gate to look. Parked at the curb were a white Gilbert Police Department cruiser and a marked Maricopa County Animal Care and Control truck. Standing on the sidewalk in front of them was Brenda. She had removed her face mask, put on a pristine pastel pink blouse, and was holding a massive, thick white binder jammed full of printed emails and HOA documentation. Standing next to her were 2 people. A tall, visibly exhausted police officer with a heavy duty belt, and an animal control officer wearing beige khakis and holding a metal catchpole. Brenda was waving her hands frantically, pointing at my house like she was directing a military airstrike. "He's running an illegal slaughterhouse," she was screeching as I walked down the driveway. "He brought in industrial concrete equipment. He has wild, aggressive birds screaming all night, and he has a giant, dangerous, untamed beast that he's using to intimidate the neighborhood." I stopped at the edge of my driveway, folded my arms, and smiled. "Afternoon, officers." The police officer let out a long, heavy sigh. His name tag read, "Officer Miller." He looked at me, then looked at Brenda, then rubbed the bridge of his nose like he was feeling a massive headache coming on. "Sir?" Officer Miller said, walking up the driveway while Brenda trailed behind him like an angry shadow. "We received a call regarding a public nuisance, an unregistered commercial operation, and a potential code violation involving a dangerous animal." "I see," I said politely. "Well, I can assure you there is no public nuisance, no slaughterhouse, and no dangerous animal. What we have here is a simple case of neighborhood disagreement over state agricultural preemption." "Don't listen to him," Brenda snapped, thrusting her pink binder forward. He's making up laws. I have the Desert Blossom bylaws right here. Section 4B clearly states no dogs over 75 pounds. Section 8 prohibits unapproved outbuildings. He is violating community standards. Ma'am, Officer Miller said, holding up a single hand to stop her. Please let me speak. He turned back to me. Sir, Animal Control is here because we had a report of an aggressive, uncontained, large breed dog. Do you mind if we see the animal? Not at all, I replied smoothly. In fact, I encourage it. Please, follow me. I led Officer Miller, the Animal Control officer, whose name tag read Sanchez, and an extremely triumphant-looking Brenda through the side gate into the backyard. The moment we walked through the gate, the scene was legendary. The concrete for the new duck bunker was drying in the sun. Inside the reinforced steel cage, breakfast, lunch, and dinner were standing completely erect, staring at the visitors and quacking with the intensity of a jet engine. And sitting right in front of the cage, on top of a pink plush orthopedic dog bed I had dragged out for him, was Meatball. He was wearing a high-visibility, bright orange reflective vest that I had bought at a local farm supply store an hour earlier. Stenciled on the side of the vest in bold black block letters were the words, "Working asset. Do not pet." Meatball was currently sitting totally motionless, a massive thread of drool hanging from his mouth, staring blankly at a stray dandelion. When he saw the officers, he slowly tilted his massive head, let out a deep, pathetic sigh, and slumped sideways onto his dog bed, instantly falling back asleep. Officer Sanchez from Animal Control stared at Meatball. Then he looked at his metal catchpole. Then he looked at Brenda. "Ma'am," Sanchez said slowly, pointing at Meatball, "is that the untamed beast you called us about?" "Yes," Brenda insisted, taking a step forward. "Look at the size of him. He's over 150 pounds. He's an intimidating, aggressive weapon. He shouldn't be in a residential zone." "Ma'am," Sanchez replied, his voice dripping with utter disbelief, "that dog is actively snoring. He looks like he doesn't even have the energy to chew his own food." "It's not about his energy, it's about his classification," Brenda yelled. "He violates the HOA weight limits." This was my moment, the exact second where the trap snaps shut. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the manila folder, and withdrew the thick stack of papers I had spent the week preparing. I stepped past Brenda and handed the documents directly to Officer Miller. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the backyard, "what you are looking at is a certified, notarized copy of Form 112C, registered with the Arizona Department of Agriculture, alongside my state urban poultry land and exemption." Officer Miller flipped open the packet. He started reading. I helped him navigate it. "As you can see," I explained, "my property meets the lot size requirement under Maricopa County zoning codes for residential urban farming. Under Arizona Revised Statutes, Title III, Section 112, state agricultural laws preempt all local, municipal, and private HOA covenants regarding urban agricultural operations." Officer Miller raised an eyebrow. "Agricultural operations?" "Yes," I pointed to the duck bunker. "I am harboring 3 registered poultry fowl for non-commercial egg production. Under state guidelines, property owners maintaining urban livestock are explicitly authorized to utilize non-lethal predator deterrence assets to protect their flock from native wildlife, specifically coyotes." "He doesn't have coyotes," Brenda shrieked. "This is a gated community." "Coyotes jump 6-foot walls every single night in Maricopa County, Brenda," I shot back smoothly. "And state law does not require me to wait for my livestock to be slaughtered before deploying protective measures." I pointed directly to the second page of the state form in Officer Miller's hands. Section 12. Paragraph C of the State Agricultural Preemption Guidelines explicitly dictates that animals registered as working livestock guardian assets are legally categorized as agricultural equipment, not household pets, I continued. pacing back and forth like a courtroom lawyer. Therefore, local weight limits, breed restrictions, and HOA pet quotas are entirely legally void. Meatball is not a pet under the law, officer. He is a farm implement. He is protected by state preemption. Officer Sanchez from Animal Control suddenly covered his mouth with his hand, turning his head away. His shoulders were shaking violently. He was desperately trying not to laugh out loud. Officer Miller stared at the notarized state stamp on the paper. He read the statutory citation. He looked at the orange vest on Meatball. He looked at the 3 ducks, who chose that exact moment to let out a synchronized, deafening chorus of quacks. Then, Officer Miller looked at Brenda. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice completely flat. "Are you the president of this homeowners association?" "Yes," Brenda declared proudly, straightening her collar. "And I demand you issue a citation for this illegal farm and confiscate that dog." Officer Miller slowly handed the paper back to me. He adjusted his duty belt, looked Brenda straight in the eye, and took a breath. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, "I am a police officer, not an agricultural regulator. But according to these state-stamped documents, this property is operating under a valid state land use exemption. State law supersedes your HOA rules, which means, as far as the Gilbert Police Department is concerned, this dog isn't violating a single state or municipal law. He's farm equipment." "Farm equipment?" Brenda gasped, clutching her heart like she had just been stabbed. "He's a Mastiff." "He's a registered livestock guardian, ma'am," Sanchez chimed in, finally regaining his composure, though a huge grin was plastered across his face. "Animal Control has no grounds to issue a citation or seize an animal that is fully contained, healthy, registered with the state, and visibly non-aggressive. There's no violation here." "This is ridiculous!" Brenda screamed, waving her arms in the air. "I live right next door. I have to look at this cage. I have to hear these birds. It's a public nuisance. You have to do something." "If you have a civil dispute regarding property lines or nuisance law, you can take it to civil court, ma'am," Officer Miller said firmly. "But if you call 911 again to report a sleeping dog on private property, I will issue you a citation for misuse of the emergency response system. Do you understand?" Brenda stood there, frozen in shock. Her face went from red to white to a deep, bruised purple. She looked at Officer Miller. She looked at Sanchez. She looked at me. Standing there with my notarized legal binder and my iced coffee. "Now," I said, stepping forward, my voice dropping an octave into pure, sharp professionalism. "Officer Miller, while you're here, I'd actually like to report a crime." Brenda snapped her head toward me. "What?" "Under Arizona law, entering someone's fully enclosed, fenced private property without permission after being explicitly warned is third-degree criminal trespass," I said, pointing to the open side gate. "When you 2 officers arrived, Brenda marched through my private gate, uninvited, onto my property to confront me. I have it all captured on my ring camera at the front and my patio security camera at the back." Officer Miller turned his head slowly to look at Brenda. "Ma'am, did you walk into his fenced yard without his permission?" I was directing you," she stammered, stepping backward toward the gate. "I was showing you the violation." "Officer," I said, holding up my phone, "I would like to formally request that Brenda be issued an official notice of criminal trespass. I want her legally barred from stepping foot onto my lot, my driveway, or my gated perimeter ever again." Officer Miller pulled a small notepad out of his shirt pocket. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation, "step out to the sidewalk right now. I'm going to issue you a formal trespass warning. If you step foot on this gentleman's land again for any reason, including delivering HOA notices, you will be arrested for criminal trespass on the spot." "You can't trespass the HOA president!" Brenda shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that probably only Meatball could hear. "I can, ma'am," And I am, Officer Miller replied. Move to the sidewalk, now. Watching Brenda get marched out of my backyard by a police officer while holding her useless pink binder was a sensory experience that I will treasure for the rest of my natural life. As they walked out the gate, Officer Sanchez lingered behind for a second. He looked at Meatball, who hadn't moved an inch during the entire high-stakes legal confrontation, then looked at me. Working asset, huh? Sanchez chuckled, shaking his head. He's a tactical operator, I said with a completely straight face. Sanchez burst out laughing, gave me a quick thumb up, and walked out the gate, letting it latch shut behind him. The immediate aftermath was pure, uninterrupted bliss. But I knew the final battle hadn't been fought yet. Brenda had been humbled by the police, but HOAs are like hydras. You cut off one petty administrative head, and 3 more draft minutes take its place. She still had the official HOA board meeting coming up on Monday night. The Desert Blossom monthly community board meeting was held in the air-conditioned conference room of the local public library. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wasn't wearing my usual casual shorts and t-shirt. I had put on a sharp, charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and brought a sleek black leather briefcase. I walked into the room carrying an extra-large iced coffee. The room was filled with about 20 elderly residents sitting in folding chairs, looking deeply bored. Sitting at a long folding table at the front of the room were the 4 members of the HOA board. And sitting right in the center, presiding over the table with a gavel in her hand, was Brenda. She looked exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her knuckles were white as she held the gavel. When I walked in, carrying my briefcase, the entire room fell dead silent. Brenda's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed into slits. I took a seat right in the front row, opened my briefcase, and laid out 4 identical, perfectly bound plastic comb-bound booklets onto my lap. We will now open the floor for member comments, Brenda announced, her voice shaking slightly as she beat the gavel against the wooden block once. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board? I stood up immediately. I do, Madam President. I walked up to the board table. Without saying a word, I handed one of the comb-bound booklets to each of the 3 other board members. A quiet guy named Dave, an elderly woman named Clara, and a local real estate guy named Tom. I didn't give one to Brenda. What is this? Tom asked, flipping open the cover. That, I said, turning to face the audience before looking back at the board, is a formal legal brief and pre-litigation notice regarding the actions of HOA President Brenda over the past 3 weeks. Brenda slammed her gavel down. You are out of order. This meeting is for general community business. Section 3 of the Arizona Open Meeting Laws for Planned Communities dictates that homeowners have a statutory right to address the board on matters regarding enforcement actions. I shot back instantly, my voice ringing out across the room. And unless you want this entire board named as co-defendants in a state civil suit, I suggest you let me speak, Brenda. The other board members looked at each other nervously. Dave quickly cleared his throat. Let him speak, Brenda. What's this about a suit? Members of the board, I began, pacing calmly in front of the table. Over the past 21 days, Brenda has utilized community funds, administrative resources, and official HOA letterhead to conduct a targeted campaign of selective enforcement and harassment against Lot 42. You have a dangerous dog, Brenda shouted. As documented on page 4 of your packet, I continued seamlessly, ignoring her completely. The animal on Lot 42 is a state-registered, notarized working livestock guardian asset, fully protected under the Arizona Right to Farm Act. As Officer Miller of the Gilbert Police Department formally notified Brenda on Friday afternoon, state law preempts all community weight limits and pet covenants. The board members were frantically reading through the statutory citations in the booklet. Clara's eyes went wide. Wait, you have ducks? I have legally protected agricultural fowl, Clara, I said politely, which brings me to my primary point. I stepped right up to the center of the table, leaning forward slightly. Under Arizona Revised Statutes Title 3, Section 112, Paragraph B, any individual or governing entity that knowingly attempts to interfere with, harass, or levy illegal financial penalties against a verified agricultural operation is guilty of bad faith interference with state-protected farming rights. That statute carries a mandatory statutory fine of up to $2,500 per violation, plus attorney fees. I pointed directly at the packet in Tom's hands. Brenda has issued 7 invalid fines against my property, totaling $700. She has threatened an illegal lien. She did this after receiving certified mail notice of my state agricultural exemption. That means the HOA board, and by extension, the financial reserves of this entire neighborhood, is currently exposed to over $17,000 in state statutory penalties for bad faith agricultural harassment, entirely driven by Brenda's personal vendetta. A collective gasp went up from the elderly residents sitting in the folding chairs behind me. $17,000? Dave exclaimed, turning to stare at Brenda. Brenda, did you get a certified letter from the state? It's a technicality, Brenda stammered, her face turning crimson. He's using a loophole. He brought ducks into Desert Blossom. A legal loophole is just called the law, Brenda, I said coldly. And my paperwork is bulletproof. Tom, the real estate guy, pulled out his phone, looked up the statute number printed in the booklet, read it for 30 seconds, and then closed his eyes in pure agony. He looked at Brenda like she had just set his house on fire. Brenda, Tom said, his voice deadly serious. Did the police issue you a criminal trespass warning on his lot on Friday? Brenda went completely quiet. She shrank back into her leather chair. Is that true? Clara gasped. You got trespassed by the police while representing the board? She did, I confirmed. And here is my offer to the board tonight. I am a reasonable man. I don't want to sue my own neighborhood. I like my house. I like my ducks. And Meatball loves his new job. I closed my briefcase with a sharp, metallic snap. Here are my terms for a full legal release of liability for the Desert Blossom HOA, I stated clearly. First, all citations and fines against Lot 42 are permanently rescinded, erased from the record, and acknowledged in writing as legally void. Second, the HOA Board officially recognizes Lot 42's state agricultural exemption and agrees to issue no further inquiries, architectural restrictions, or pet citations regarding asset number 1 or my protected flock. And third, I looked directly at Brenda, who was hyperventilating. Due to the catastrophic legal liability and gross negligence she has brought upon this community, Brenda must immediately resign as HOA president and step down from the board. The room erupted. Second, Dave yelled instantly from the board table, not even waiting for a formal motion. I second that motion. We need to vote on this right now. You can't do this, Brenda screamed, slamming her gavel down repeatedly. I am the president. I built this committee. Dave, Tom said, ignoring Brenda completely. I move to accept the gentleman's settlement terms in full, vacate all fines against Lot 42, and call for an emergency vote to strip Brenda of her executive duties. All in favor? Dave called out. Dave, Tom, and Clara all raised their hands simultaneously. Motion carries, Tom said smoothly, taking the gavel directly out of Brenda's trembling hand and setting it on his side of the table. Brenda, you're out. Please hand over the master keys and the administrative binder. Brenda sat there for 5 full seconds, completely paralyzed. The entire audience of neighbors was staring at her. Some of them were actually clapping. She stood up so fast her folding chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the carpet. She grabbed her purse, pushed past me without making eye contact, and sprinted out the emergency exit of the library, the heavy doors slamming shut behind her. I stood in the quiet conference room, took a slow, highly satisfying sip of my iced coffee, and smiled at the remaining board members. "Pleasure doing business with you, Consensus," I said smoothly. "Have a great rest of your meeting." 3 weeks later, the Arizona summer heat was finally starting to break into the mid-90s. I was sitting on my back patio, leaning back in my lawn chair with my feet kicked up on a cooler. The sun was setting over Gilbert, casting a gorgeous orange and purple glow across the desert sky. The backyard had changed a bit. Sal's concrete duck bunker was painted a sleek, neutral gray that matched the trim of my house. Inside the enclosure, breakfast, lunch, and dinner were floating lazily in their freshly cleaned pool, letting out quiet, content quacks as they preened their feathers. Meatball was laying stretched out across the patio, wearing his bright orange working asset vest. He had his massive chin resting directly on my sneaker. A single duck feather was stuck to his nose. He blew it off with a heavy, sleepy snort, didn't bother to chase it, and went right back to sleep. I looked over at the cinder block wall. There was no pink measuring tape. There was no screaming. In fact, there was a bright blue and white "For Sale" sign standing in the front yard of the property next door. Brenda had put her house on the market 4 days after the board meeting. I raised my iced coffee toward the empty wall, taking a cold, crisp sip. "Good job, team," I whispered into the quiet desert evening. "Another successful day down on the farm."